Before we start, if you enjoy the story, please leave a like and check if you're subscribed. The debris field stretched for kilometers in every direction, a graveyard of metal and frozen atmosphere that caught the light from the distant star and threw it back in fractured silver. Jackson Reed guided his salvaged ship through the wreckage with the kind of muscle memory that came from years of threading needles no sane pilot would attempt. His hands moved across the controls with practiced economy, adjusting thrust and angle, while his eyes tracked the sensor readouts that Iris fed to the cockpit display. "Picking up something on the far side of that shattered moon?" Iris said, her voice calm and androgynous through the cabin speakers. "Define something." "Distress beacon. Velithar frequency." Jackson's hands stilled on the controls. He'd seen plenty of wrecks in his time working the outer rim, but Velithar ships were rare this far into contested space. The silent war between humanity's corporate fleets and the matriarchal aliens had turned the frontier into a lawless stretch of void, where salvage rights meant more than sovereignty and finding a Velithar vessel intact enough to broadcast a signal meant valuable tech. Any other ships in range? Not yet, but if we're picking up the beacon, someone else will too. Jackson adjusted course, swinging wide around a tumbling chunk of hull plating that had once belonged to a human frigate. The debris field was fresh, maybe a day old, and the scorch marks on the wreckage told the story of a fight that had ended badly for everyone involved. The Velithar ship came into view as he cleared the moon's shadow. It was small, built for speed and reconnaissance, rather than sustained combat, and the gash torn through its port side had vented atmosphere and left the vessel spinning slowly in the black. Jackson brought his ship alongside and matched the rotation, his pulse steady despite the risk. Boarding a dying alien vessel was the kind of mistake that got salvagers killed, but the beacon was still transmitting, which meant someone might still be alive. "Running environmental scan," Iris said. "Life signs?" "1. Faint. Velithar biology." Jackson was already moving, pulling his pressure suit from the locker and sealing himself in with efficient, automatic movements. He grabbed his sidearm and mag-locked it into his thigh, then cycled through the airlock and fired his maneuvering jets to cross the gap between ships. The Velithar hull was smooth beneath his gloves, unnaturally so, and he could see the faint tracery of their bioelectric interfaces glowing dimly around the airlock controls. He bypassed the system with a portable charge pack and forced the door open manually. The interior was dark and cold, the emergency lighting casting everything in shades of blue and violet. Jackson moved through the corridors with his weapon drawn, his breath loud in his helmet as he followed Iris's directions toward the cockpit. The ship's design was elegant and organic, in a way human vessels never managed, all curves and flowing lines that made him feel like he was walking through something alive. He found her collapsed near the breached section, one arm reaching toward a control panel she'd never made it to. Her skin was a striking cyan blue, smooth and luminous even in the dim light, and her hair was a cascade of vibrant magenta pink that pooled around her shoulders. She was small, slender, with delicate features and pointed ears that extended horizontally from her head. Her large eyes were closed, and the faint amber glow he'd read about in intelligence briefings was absent. Jackson knelt beside her and checked for a pulse, his gloved fingers finding the spot on her throat where Velithar physiology kept the major artery. It was there, weak and irregular, but present. He looked at the wound on her side, where something had torn through both her suit and flesh, and at the blood, darker than human red, almost purple, that had dried against her skin. "She's alive," he said. "Barely. You need to move now. I'm detecting incoming ships. 3 signatures. Mercenary configuration." Jackson didn't hesitate. He scooped the Vethelar into his arms, surprised by how light she was, and started back toward the airlock at a run. Behind him, the ship's hull groaned as the structural integrity finally gave way, sections collapsing inward with the slow, terrible inevitability of failing alloys. He was halfway across the gap when the first plasma rounds lit up the black. The mercenary ships came in fast and aggressive, their weapons tearing through what remained of the Vethelar vessel. Jackson fired his jets at maximum burn, twisting in space to keep his body between the incoming fire and the woman in his arms. Something punched through his shoulder with white-hot force, and he felt the pressure suit seal automatically around the wound, even as pain flooded his nervous system. Iris brought his ship around hard, the airlock already cycling open. Jackson tumbled through with the Velithar still clutched against his chest, and the door sealed behind them as the autopilot kicked in and the ship accelerated away from the debris field at a burn rate that made his vision swim. He collapsed on the deck, his shoulders screaming, and heard the Velithar woman gasp beside him. Her eyes opened, amber and glowing faintly in the cabin light, and focused on him with an intensity that cut through the pain. She pushed herself up on one arm, her movements weak but deliberate, and looked at the blood spreading across his suit. "You were hit," she said, her voice low and precise despite the strain. "Yeah, happens." She reached for him, her 4-fingered hand hovering over his wound, and Jackson saw something flicker across her face that might have been conflict or surprise. Then she pressed her palm against his shoulder, and he felt the jolt of her bioelectric ability surge through his body. It wasn't painful, exactly, but it was foreign and evasive, and he could feel her presence inside his nervous system, redirecting signals and forcing damaged tissue to respond. Her ears twitched with concentration, the subtle movement betraying an emotional state her face didn't show, and Jackson found himself watching the way her pink hair fell forward to frame her features. The pain receded to a manageable throb, and the woman pulled her hand back as if burned. She looked at her palm, then at Jackson, and something passed between them that neither could have named. "You shielded me," she said. "Seemed like the thing to do. Why?" Jackson sat up slowly, wincing. He looked at her, this alien woman with skin like ocean water and hair like sunset, who nearly died alone in the black, and shrugged with his good shoulder. "Didn't feel right leaving you." She studied him for a long moment, her amber eyes unreadable, then nodded once. It wasn't gratitude, not exactly, but it was acknowledgement. Jackson got to his feet and offered her his hand. She hesitated, then took it, her skin cool and smooth against his palm as he pulled her up. "I'm Jackson." "Aethra." They stood in the cramped cabin as Iris flew them deeper into uncharted space, the silence heavy with questions neither was ready to ask. Jackson noticed the way her hair seemed to glow faintly in the low light, and Aethra found herself watching the unguarded way he moved despite his injury, one hand still resting near his weapon, even as exhaustion pulled at his features. Outside, the stars stretched into lines as the ship pushed toward the edge of known space, carrying 2 people who shouldn't have trusted each other toward a destination neither could predict. The first day passed in tense efficiency. Aethra moved through Jackson's ship with careful precision, her amber eyes cataloging every detail. Jackson watched from the cockpit while Iris ran diagnostics, noting how Aethra's ears swiveled to track sounds he couldn't consciously hear. The hum of life support, the engine vibration, the recycler's rhythmic pulse. "Your ship is old," Aethra said, running her hand along a junction panel Jackson had patched 3 times. "She gets the job done." "The power distribution is inefficient. You're losing 15% to thermal bleed." Jackson leaned back and crossed his arms. "You offering to fix it?" Aethra's ears tilted slightly. "I could improve it, if you have the correct tools." They worked together that afternoon, Aethra's technical knowledge complementing Jackson's improvised solutions. She interfaced with the ship's systems through touch, her bioelectric abilities diagnosing problems faster than any scanner, while Jackson kept dying machinery alive through sheer stubbornness. Their methods clashed. She wanted precision. He wanted quick fixes. But the arguments gradually shifted toward something almost like banter. "You're going to burn out the entire relay," Aethra said as Jackson bypassed a failing regulator. "Haven't yet." "Probability suggests your luck will end." "Probability doesn't know me." Her ears flicked forward in what might have been amusement, and Jackson caught himself smiling. By the 3rd day, they'd fallen into a rhythm. Jackson cooked from his limited stores, protein blocks and dehydrated vegetables that Aethra picked at cautiously, while she improved his navigation systems. They didn't talk much beyond necessities, but the silence between them lost its sharp edges. The asteroid field appeared on their 5th day out, a dense cluster that Iris flagged as high risk. Jackson plotted a course through the gaps, his hands steady on the controls as rocks the size of buildings drifted past in slow, lethal patterns. "Adjust heading 3 degrees port," Aethra said from the co-pilot seat. "I've got it." A chunk of ice-crusted stone tumbled toward them, spinning end over end. Jackson fired the maneuvering jets to slip past with meters to spare. Aethra's hand shot out and covered his on the controls, her cool blue fingers wrapping around his wrist as she guided his movements with minute adjustments. They threaded through a gap he wouldn't have attempted alone, the ship shuddering as debris pinged off the hull. Jackson looked down at where her hand rested on his, feeling the smooth texture of her skin and the faint electromagnetic hum beneath. Aethra followed his gaze and pulled back quickly, her ears flattening. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once, eyes fixed on the view screen. That evening, Jackson shared his last bottle of actual alcohol and poured it into 2 cups. Aethra sniffed hers cautiously. "It smells like fuel." "It kind of is." She took a careful sip and made a face Jackson found unreasonably endearing. They sat on the cargo bay deck, backs against supply crates, and Jackson found himself talking about things he hadn't said aloud in years. He told her about his crew, about the corporate ambush that killed them while he'd been off ship, about the guilt that hollowed him out and drove him to the edges of known space. Aethra listened with an intensity that made his chest tight, her amber eyes never leaving his face. When he finished, she was quiet. "Vethelar do not speak of loss," she said finally. "We are taught to accept it as inevitable and continue our duties. But I understand what it means to carry the weight of those who are gone." "You lost someone?" Her ears tilted back. "My sister." She questioned the matriarch's strategy and was reassigned to a ship that did not return. The official record says it was destroyed in combat. I believe it was silenced. Jackson set down his cup. "I'm sorry." "Do not apologize. You did not cause it." "Still sorry it happened." Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the careful control she maintained. "Your empathy is unexpected. We are told humans feel too much, that your emotions make you dangerous. but I think perhaps we fear what we do not allow ourselves." The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to examine. When Kale's mercenaries found them at a refueling station 2 days later, Jackson and Aethra moved as a unit. Jackson laid down covering fire while Aethra disabled the security systems, buying time to reach the ship. A mercenary got close, weapon raised, and Aethra threw herself between him and Jackson with the same reckless loyalty Jackson had shown her. The shock she delivered dropped the mercenary instantly, but left her drained and shaking. Jackson caught her as her legs buckled, one arm around her waist as he fired with the other hand and backed them toward the airlock. They made it aboard by seconds, and Iris punched the engines hard enough that they both slammed against the bulkhead. Jackson held Aethra steady as acceleration pinned them, feeling her breath against his neck and the tremor in her frame. When the ship leveled out, neither moved. Her hair had come loose and fell across his arm in waves of impossible pink. Jackson reached up to touch a strand before he could think better of it. Aethra went very still. Among her people, touching someone's hair was intimate, reserved for family and bonded pairs. Her ears swiveled forward slowly, and she turned her head to look at him, their faces close enough that he could see the variations in the cyan of her skin and the way her pupils dilated. "Jackson," she said. His name strange and careful in her precise pronunciation. He didn't let go. "Yeah?" "This is not wise." "Probably not." Her hand came up to rest against his chest, palm flat over his heart. He could feel the faint electrical charge between them. Not her ability, but something else entirely. Something that had everything to do with the way she was looking at him. They reached the transmission point 2 days later. Aethra stood at the communications array while Jackson watched from the doorway, seeing the conflict in every line of her body as she entered the codes that would summon her fleet. When the message began transmitting, she turned to face him. "They will come," she said, "within 3 days. And then?" "And then I will be recalled, interrogated, my actions evaluated." Jackson crossed the space between them. "What happens if they don't like your answers?" Aethra's control cracked, and he saw fear flicker across her features. "Velithar law forbids bonding with other species. What I feel could result in exile, or worse." "What do you feel?" She looked at him, her amber eyes luminous and uncertain. "I do not have words in your language, or in mine. My people do not acknowledge such things readily." Jackson took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers despite the difference in their anatomy, feeling the coolness of her skin and the barely perceptible pulse of electricity beneath. "I've already decided you're worth the risk, even if it means standing against your entire fleet." Aethra's ears tilted forward fully, and her free hand came up to touch his face with a gentleness that made his breath catch. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both." "I should not want this," she whispered. "I should not want you. But you do." Her thumb traced the line of his jaw, and when she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Yes." The Velithar fleet emerged from subspace 3 days later, their ships appearing as sleek silhouettes against the starfield, predatory and elegant in ways human vessels never achieved. Jackson watched them approach on his view screen, counting 6 warships in tight formation, and knew that running would be pointless. Iris had already calculated the odds and declined to share them. "They're hailing," Iris said. "Put them through." The voice that appeared on his display was older than Aethra, her cyan skin faded to pale turquoise, and her purple hair woven into intricate braids. "Captain Savra." Her amber eyes swept across Jackson's cockpit with open disdain. "Human salvager, you will power down your weapons and engines. Officer Aethra will be transferred to our custody immediately." Jackson glanced at Aethra, who stood beside him with her spine rigid and her ears held flat. "And if I refuse?" "Then we will take her by force and destroy your vessel as salvage." Aethra's hand found his wrist, her fingers cool and trembling. "Do not fight them, please." The Velithar boarding party arrived within the hour. 4 warriors in form-fitting armor that hummed with bioelectric potential. They moved through Jackson's ship with precise efficiency, scanning every surface and treating them like a threat to be contained. One remained stationed at his shoulder, while the others escorted Aethra to the airlock. She turned back once, her eyes meeting Jackson's across the cargo bay, and the look on her face made his chest tighten. Then she was gone, the airlock cycling shut, and Jackson was left standing in his own ship under armed guard, while the Velithar fleet maintained weapons lock. Aboard the Velithar command vessel, Aethra stood before the tribunal in a chamber that resonated with the low hum of their bioelectric systems. Captain Savra sat at the center of 5 matriarchs, her posture radiating authority and barely contained anger. "Officer Aethra," Savra said, "you were given a mission of critical importance. You were to eliminate the human corporate officer known as Victor Strand, whose expansion into our territory threatened our sovereignty. Yet you failed to complete your assignment, and now we find you aboard a human salvage vessel, your loyalty compromised." Aethra kept her ears level, refusing to show submission. "My ship was sabotaged. The navigation systems failed during approach, and I was forced to abort before the hull breach rendered me unconscious. The human, Jackson Reed, rescued me from certain death. And in exchange for this rescue, you provided him with what intelligence? None. I told him only what was necessary to ensure our survival." One of the other matriarchs leaned forward, her expression calculating. "Yet you remained with him for 8 days rather than immediately signaling for extraction. You worked beside him, shared his quarters. The boarding party reports evidence of emotional attachment." Aethra's control wavered. "He saved my life at risk to his own. Velithar honor demands acknowledgement of such debt." "Honor does not require you to develop feelings for an inferior species," Savra said coldly. "Your emotional compromise has placed this entire fleet at risk. The human knows your identity, your ship's configuration, and enough about our operations to sell that information to the highest bidder. Jackson Reed is not a spy or a mercenary. He is—" "What?" Savra's eyes narrowed. "What is he to you, officer?" The silence stretched, and Aethra felt the weight of 5 pairs of eyes dissecting her response. She thought of Jackson's hands on the ship controls, his stubborn loyalty despite every reason to abandon her, the way he'd touched her hair as if she were precious rather than alien. "He is someone who showed me that human emotion is not weakness," Aethra said quietly. "That feeling deeply does not make one inferior." Savra stood, her posture radiating disgust. "You are confined to quarters pending formal charges of dereliction and emotional compromise. The human will be dealt with separately." Aethra's ears snapped forward. "What does that mean?" "It means we have hired appropriate testimony to ensure the correct narrative emerges. The mercenary Kale Drazov has been most cooperative." Back on Jackson's ship, the guard's communication device chirped. He listened, then looked at Jackson with something that might have been pity. "You have a visitor." Kale Drazov stepped through the airlock with the swagger of someone who knew he'd already won. He was broad-shouldered and graying, his mismatched armor telling the story of too many fights survived through luck and ruthlessness. "Reed," he said, grinning. "Hell of a situation you've gotten yourself into." Jackson's hands clenched. "What are you doing here?" "Providing testimony. The Velithar want to know all about how you've captured their officer, held her for ransom, probably tortured her for information. Lucky for them, I'm a very credible witness." "That's a lie." "Sure it is, but who's going to believe you? A human salvager with a record of questionable dealings? Or a respected mercenary captain who just wants to see justice done?" Kale leaned against the bulkhead, still smiling. "They're going to execute you, Reed. Probably space you without a suit. But hey, at least the Velithar girl will be safe from your corrupting influence." Jackson took a step forward, and the guard's weapon came up immediately. Kale laughed. "Easy. Wouldn't want you to make this harder on yourself." After Kale left, Jackson stood in the empty cargo bay and felt the walls of his ship pressing in. Iris's voice came through softly. "I've been monitoring their communications. It's not good. Tell me." "Captain Savra plans to destroy this ship with you aboard and report Aethra as psychologically compromised. No witnesses, no complications, clean end." Jackson closed his eyes. "How long?" 6 hours, maybe less." "Can you break through their security?" "Not from here, but I've been recording everything, including Savra's orders and Kale's testimony." "If we could get it to Aethra." "She's confined." "Yes, but she has bioelectric abilities we don't." In her quarters aboard the command vessel, Aethra sat with her back against the wall and her eyes closed, reaching out with her senses to feel the electromagnetic signatures of the ship around her. Every system hummed with data flow: communications, navigation, weapons control, security protocols. The matriarchs believed her confined and compliant, too disciplined to rebel. They were wrong. She'd been taught from childhood to interface with technology through touch, to diagnose and repair and control. But she'd also been taught limits, boundaries that governed what a Velithar should access and what should remain sacred. She'd never questioned those teachings before Jackson, before she'd seen what courage looked like when stripped of protocol and hierarchy. Aethra pressed her palm against the wall and pushed deeper into the ship's systems than she'd ever dared, past the surface diagnostics into restricted files and sealed communications. The data burned through her nervous system, overwhelming and chaotic, but she held on. She saw Savra's orders. She saw the timeline for Jackson's execution. And buried in archived mission files, she found it. Evidence of her ship's sabotage, the digital fingerprints of a rival faction within her own people who wanted her to fail. Her sister's face flickered through her mind, remembered and lost. The matriarchs had silenced her for questioning their methods, and now they would silence Aethra for the same crime, caring about something beyond duty. She pulled her hand back, her skin pale from the effort, and looked at the locked door of her quarters. Living without honor, without acknowledging what Jackson meant to her, was worse than any punishment they could devise. If she was to be exiled away, let it be for something that mattered. Aethra stood, steadied herself, and placed both hands against the control panel beside the door. She channeled every reserve of bioelectric energy she possessed into a focused electromagnetic pulse that crashed through the security system like a wave. The door slid open, alarms began to shriek, and she ran toward the shuttle bay with only one thought burning in her mind. She would not let them kill him. Aethra ran through the corridors of the command vessel as alarms wailed around her, her bare feet silent against the deck plating. Velethar warriors appeared at intersections, weapons raised, but she was faster. Dropping low and sweeping legs, delivering precise shocks that left them convulsing. She'd spent years training for combat, but never like this. Never with this kind of desperation driving her forward. The shuttle bay doors were sealed, reinforced barriers designed to contain breaches and prevent unauthorized launches. Aethra pressed both palms against the control panel and poured everything she had into the system, feeling the circuits overload and fry beneath her touch. The doors groaned, metal shrieking, and finally parting just wide enough for her to slip through. She threw herself into the nearest shuttle, her fingers flying across the interface as she brought systems online faster than any manual startup sequence allowed. Behind her, warriors flooded into the bay, plasma fire scorching the hull as she fired the engines and punched through the atmospheric shield. The Velethar fighters launched immediately, 6 of them converging on her position with weapons hot. Savra's voice cut through the communications channel, cold and furious. "Officer Aethra, you are committing treason. Stand down or be destroyed." Aethra didn't respond. She poured power into the engines and flew toward Jackson's ship, her hands steady on the controls despite the plasma bolts tearing past her canopy. One round connected, shearing away the shuttle's port stabilizer, and the craft began to spin. She fought it, using thruster bursts to maintain course while her wounded vessel screamed protest through every system. Aboard his ship, Jackson heard Iris's urgent warning. "Incoming shuttle. It's Aethra. She's breaking through under fire." Jackson was moving before Iris finished speaking, fighting past the guard with a savage efficiency born of desperation. He caught the Velethar warrior off balance and delivered a strike that sent him sprawling, then sprinted for the cockpit. The guard recovered and fired, the plasma round burning past Jackson's shoulder close enough to sear skin through his shirt. He made it to the controls and overrode the airlock protocols, bringing the ship around to meet Aethra's damaged shuttle. Through the view screen, he could see her craft trailing atmosphere and debris, surrounded by fighters that were clearly not trying to disable, but to destroy. "Iris, open all channels. Broadcast everything you've recorded. Doing it now." The evidence spilled across every frequency, human and Velethar alike. Savra's orders to execute Jackson and silence Aethra. The proof of sabotage within Velethar command. Kale's false testimony captured in full. The truth laid bare for both species to witness. Aethra's shuttle docked hard, the impact jarring, and Jackson was at the airlock before it finished cycling. She stumbled through, her cyan skin pale and her hair disheveled, a plasma burn across her side leaking dark blood. Their eyes met, and Jackson pulled her into his arms without hesitation, feeling her weight against him and the tremor in her frame. "I've got you," he said against her hair. "They were going to kill you." "I know." Her hands fisted in his shirt, and when she looked up at him, her amber eyes were bright with something beyond fear. "I could not let that happen." The Velethar fighters held position around Jackson's ship, weapons still locked but no longer firing. Through the communication channel, Jackson could hear the chaos as the broadcast evidence reached both fleets. Human corporate ships that had been monitoring the situation, Velethar vessels whose crews were now questioning their orders. Savra's face appeared on the view screen, her expression carved from ice. "You have signed your own execution order, Aethra, and the human dies with you." "No," Jackson said, stepping into frame with Aethra still held against his side. "You're done. Your conspiracy is exposed. Your own people are watching. One more word from you, human, and I will—" Savra never finished. Aethra pulled away from Jackson and moved to the communications console, her hands already interfacing with the systems. Jackson saw the concentration on her face, the way her ears tilted forward as she reached across space to touch the Velithar targeting computers. She shouldn't have been able to do it. The distance was too great, the security too robust. But she'd already broken every rule that mattered, and this was just one more boundary to cross. Jackson felt the electromagnetic pulse radiate through his ship's systems, traveling outward on wavelengths he couldn't perceive, and watched as the Velithar weapons arrays flickered and died. Aethra redirected Savra's own weapons, turning them toward their source vessel with a precision that spoke to years of technical training. The threat was clear. Fire on Jackson's ship, and the command vessel would tear itself apart. Then Aethra collapsed. Jackson caught her before she hit the deck, lowering her carefully as her skin went dangerously pale and her breathing turned shallow. He could feel the heat radiating from her body, the cost of channeling that much bioelectric energy burning through her system faster than it could compensate. "Stay with me," he said, carrying her to the medical bay and laying her on the narrow bed. "Iris, help me. Her core temperature is spiking. She needs cooling and electrolyte replacement. There should be medical supplies in the storage locker." Jackson worked with hands that refused to shake, applying cold compresses and administering the closest approximation to Velithar physiology he could manage. He stayed beside her, one hand holding hers, while monitors tracked her vital signs back toward stability. Hours passed before she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, focusing on his face, and her ears tilted forward in recognition. "You stayed," she whispered. "Where else would I go?" "Your shoulder is injured again." Jackson glanced at where the guard's plasma round had grazed him. "Worth it." Aethra's fingers squeezed his weakly. "What happened with Savra?" "She's been recalled by her own tribunal. Turns out broadcasting evidence of conspiracy doesn't make you popular with your superiors. The younger officers are calling for reform. Apparently you're not the only one who's been questioning the old ways." "And the matriarchs?" "Issued a conditional truce with humanity. You and I are officially the worst, or best, diplomats either species has ever produced." A sound escaped her that might have been a laugh. "I have been formally exiled from the Velithar fleet." Jackson leaned forward, his free hand coming up to cup her face. "Then stay here, with me. Not as a passenger or as an ally, as my partner." Her thumb traced along his jaw, the gesture achingly familiar now. "Partners in what?" "Everything. Salvage runs, diplomatic incidents, making the universe slightly more interesting." "Humans are chaos." "Yeah, but chaos isn't the same as weakness." Aethra pulled him down until their foreheads touched, her ears tilting forward fully in the Velithar sign of joy. "No, it is not. And perhaps chaos is exactly what the universe needs." Months later, they navigated the frontier together. Jackson's ship modified with Velithar technology and carrying clearance from both species. They took salvage jobs and acted as informal intermediaries, their bond a living bridge between worlds that had spent years in silent conflict. Jackson stood at the controls while Aethra worked beside him, her pink hair catching the light from the view screen as they plotted course toward another debris field. Their hands moved across the console in practice synchronization, and when their fingers brushed, the electromagnetic pulse that passed between them had nothing to do with her abilities, and everything to do with what they'd built together. Outside, the stars stretched infinite and vast, no longer a void to be feared, but a frontier to explore together.